and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. It's Rohan here, and with me today I have Phil. Hey, Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks. And we also have a guest on, Aaron. How are you, Aaron?
Hey guys, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Thank you for coming on. So whereabouts from the world are you, Aaron?
I'm from the great state of Colorado in the United States, the city of Denver.
Oh, lovely. So you are also someone that contributes a lot to Home Assistant, so thank you very much for all your contributions to Home Assistant as well.
Sure, my pleasure. It's a joy and an honor. I know I speak for the whole community. This is a project of passion, I should say, and we greatly appreciate being able to be involved with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to get to know all about your smart home in a bit, but first we have a new release, as usual, is 0.70.
That's right. So just getting right into it. So we've got a new component for Home at a Cloud. So things like shutters, motion, and even power switches and light switches that measure light levels. So a lot of these components are now included.
Yeah, that's awesome. Always good to have more options, especially for power monitoring. I think that's a really good one to have if you can use it. Another new component that's come in is the Facebox facial and number recognition. Very well timed for all the GDPR updates we're getting. Nothing like something else that can track your face in the house, huh?
That's right. So I'm not familiar with Facebox. Phil, I don't know if you looked into that one at all. Is it local? Is it cloud or?
No, to be honest, I didn't look into it too well, but it looks awesome. Because it can also recognize numbers as well as faces. So I'm not sure if it's local or cloud, but it's good to see that the camera component is getting some more facial recognition features added to it as well.
Their docs talk about it being on-prem or in the cloud, machine learning capabilities without a science degree.
Oh, there you go.
That's interesting. So yeah, like it's going to be interesting if it is on-prem. I'm curious as to how much horsepower that thing uses. Typically, when you say anything machine learning or AI or any of that, you now have rows. In my mind, at least, you have rows of servers.
I don't definitely not running on a Raspberry Pi Zero.
Yeah. Well, that's it, right?
That's it.
So also new to Home Assistant is Space API. So you can allow hackerspaces to expose details about co-working locations. So that's I guess it's a cloud.
Yeah, good for freelancers to find out if their local community space is open or closed for the day or what's going on there. That's cool. Also another great GDPR timing one is the Samsung Family Hub refrigerator. The camera, which I don't know why you need a camera on the side of your fridge, can now be supported in Home Assistant. I wonder if that, I didn't look into that too far, but I wonder if that's the internal cameras where you can actually see, have I got enough eggs in the fridge, or if there's a camera outside for Skype calls that you get to access to. But I'm surprised that someone was able to actually get access to that Samsung camera feed. Usually they're pretty locked down, all that Samsung firmware.
Yeah, well, Samsung is trying to be more home friendly, right? With regards to having things like SmartThings and so on and so forth. They're trying to integrate a lot more things with that. So I think because of that, or as a result of that, I think now that's where we're starting to see more open APIs for different things, washing machine, fridges, things like that. I'm saying this, I haven't actually looked into it myself, but I highly suspect that that's what's driving a lot of this.
The underlying package actually says something that I think a lot of us are very familiar with. He says it's all using undocumented APIs. So it's the case where I guess Samsung hasn't given us what we wanted, so we went ahead and took it anyway.
That's perfect.
That's a nice way of looking at that. I like that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because that seems to be quite a bit of there seems to be quite a bit of that, right? Like, so between Samsung, Lutron, there's quite a few more actually that do use
Absolutely.
the under the covers. Hey, I hacked this together and I'm going to make a package out of it. And
Absolutely.
Hopefully they do open things up, just so it's better for the open source community. You're not locked into a specific platform or locked into anything like that. You can kind of use whatever you want. But I can also see why that's competitive for them. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I imagine it's, on the one end, it's very exciting to be able to provide that for the community. On the other end, you're the person on Saturday morning. If the thing goes down, everybody's looking to you to figure it out.
Yeah, well,
It'd be a little daunting.
well, that's exactly it, right? It's, and I've mentioned this a couple of times because I have quite a bit of Lutron components in my house, and or the Lutron switches, and all of a sudden I'll tell my Echo to say, hey, turn on the lights or turn off the lights, and it's just like, nah. I feel like, what's going on? and I look, and again, because my Home Assistant hasn't restarted or anything like that, it still looks like it's working, but it's not. And eventually it'll throw an error, and then it's just all downhill from there. So, but yeah. So there's also a new connected component, connected spelt with a K. So that's an open source application. They run on a Node MCU ESP8266, which, funnily enough, I was actually just playing with before we started recording.
Nice.
And not with connected specifically, but with the ESP. And so they basically develop hardware for connecting wired alarm systems. So I've actually seen a couple of posts around this, and I'm not sure if it was Carlo or if it was Bra or somebody else that's posted around this, but essentially around taking a pre-existing wired alarm system, and maybe you move into a house with an alarm system there, and you rip it apart and replace it with ESP8266s, and
generally, when a home alarm system gets installed, they'll install wired sensors that need power, and you've got like windows and doors that are then have sensors on them. But if you ever cancel that subscription, it's actually more expensive for the company to come out and rip those sensors out of your home. So they just leave them, in your doors and your windows.
Yeah.
But they just obviously take the control panel. So then you've got all these doors and window sensors that have got wires running to them, but you just can't use them. So this will be a good way to build that into Home Assistant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
totally. And a lot of houses actually come wired. So I'm pretty sure my house actually is pre-wired with a lot of a lot of the cables and stuff. My only problem is when I moved into my place, the people before me here had finished the basement. So I think a lot of these wires actually hang off at somewhere that's behind drywall, and I couldn't tell you where. So, but even if you do have a house like that or something like that, then all you need to do is buy sensors that are wired and connect them down. For me personally, I really do prefer a wired sensor over a wireless sensor. It's just
less batteries to replace.
Less batteries to replace, and it's also just less RF for interference and things like that, right? So it's especially if your components are running on 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. 5 isn't even that bad, but 2.4 can be pretty bad. So, but it'd be nice to have, but so this platform does look really interesting. I'd love to hear if anybody's used this or tried this.
We'll have to fast forward several weeks, and Rohan will have busted down some drywall and done this.
You know what? I've lived here 3 years. Outside of putting in smart switches and a couple of other sensors and changing one set of blinds, I haven't done a whole lot. I need to get to that first, and then otherwise the girlfriend's going to kill me.
What are you going to use your ESP8266 with?
So I'm actually, it's funny. So I've actually been following a guide that Ben from Bra Automation put up for building LED lights or using it as a controller for LED lights.
For like an LED strip light.
Exactly. Yeah, so, nice. And what I want to do is, and Carlo's actually got a pretty good blog about this as well, is using it outside of the house to basically, instead of having pot lights and such outside of the house running under my eaves troughs, I'm going to have LED strips. And then that way the idea is to have individually addressable. So, during Christmas time, it acts as Christmas lights. During any other Halloween, they can turn them all orange or something like that, right?
Nice. Super cool.
So, Yeah, so Carlo and Ben both have tutorials around that. So I'm kind of taking both of their tutorials and mishmashing them to kind of build my own code. So
That's really cool.
yeah, so thanks guys.
And another new platform, getting back to the 070 release, is a FinTS sensor. So if you're in Germany, you can now have Home Assistant talk with your bank account. There's really a lot of privacy stuff in this release, and being in Germany, you'd think it would be a bit hard to get financial information out, but I do like that those banks have a sort of standard way of communicating, and you can access your bank balance and account information all through a Home Assistant sensor now.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's there's a few pros and cons around that, and right off the bat from a security perspective, I can think of a few cons.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're safe with that, then that sounds interesting. But like your bank balance goes under a certain amount, all your lights turn red or something like that.
Yeah. Or maybe it just shuts off everything to save electricity, so you don't have to have a huge electricity bill. It knows you can't afford it anyway.
That's right. All your smart valves turn off all the water.
We'll have to update the Home Assistant UI with all the GDPR. Hey, our terms of service have changed, just so you know.
Oh my gosh, I know. That would be pretty funny.
Okay, and some breaking changes in this release as well. A very big breaking change is coming for custom UI components. So if you're using standard Home Assistant, you've got nothing to worry about, but there's a lot of changes happening on the front end with some code refactors. So if you're using anything like I think there's a few custom UI repos out there now. So if you're using any of those, just check the compatibility before you upgrade.
Yeah. And as well, SAB NZBD, which if you're not familiar, it's I believe a Usenet downloading tool. So it's moved away from a sensor to its own component. So instead of it saying, I'm as an example, I'm downloading X amount of movies or something like that. Now, I mean, the functionality seems pretty similar, but it is its own component rather than a sensor. So that will be a breaking change.
Yeah. And BMW Connected Drive has some breaking changes. You'll need to update your configuration. But on the plus side, there's a whole bunch of new sensors. There's some cool binary sensors that have been added in, including whether or not the electric vehicle, if your BMW is electric, if it's charging or not, and also whether or not the parking lights are on or off. So that's some interesting use cases you could get out of that.
Yeah, the more I see these, I really want more of a connected vehicle, specifically an electric one.
Yes, absolutely.
But, it's definitely very cool. Also, simplepush.io as a notification platform has been completely removed from Home Assistant. So they apparently they're no longer online and available from app stores and such. So.
Yeah, their apps got taken down. Everything, they're gone.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to know if that's something to do with GDPR or if they just are gone, but for some other reasons. But.
It looks like the owner of the app sent an email in that they put in the pull request, and he said there's a bug that makes Simple Push unusable. Unfortunately, I don't have time at the moment to fix the bug. So it looks like Fabian just decided let's pull it and we'll put it back in if the service ever goes back up.
Oh, interesting. So the service is still around then. Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like the developer, it's maybe a side project or something, just didn't have time to fix the bug.
Yeah. Oh,
Right,
that's interesting.
Right.
And another breaking change. This one could be a big one if you're using the dark sky sensor. The API has deprecated the temperature min, temperature max, and also the apparent temperature min and apparent temperature max. So if you're using any of those sensors, there are replacements in the release, so you can jump in and check those.
Yeah. And some noteworthy features. So MQTT switches, you can now have unique IDs for those.
That'll be good. I'm a real big fan and looking forward to the Roku media players can now have support for their entity IDs to be hard-coded, which was actually contributed from our guest today, Aaron. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. I remember somebody had said this before, but I think we're all kind of sick of the entity IDs that say Roku underscore gobbledygook. Now you can do something more nice.
And it's really confusing when you've got like Plex on a Roku, and then the Plex gets its own ID from the Roku name, and then the Roku gets the same name, and they clash, and you don't know what's going to be Plex, what's going to be Roku when you restart.
Yeah. And then there is also support for Zigbee pressure sensors now. That's kind of cool. This may actually play into to what we're talking about with Isabella as well, in terms of having that kind of pseudo connected garbage can.
That's a good point. Yeah, you could have like a mat where the garbage bin has to sit on to say it's home or not.
That's right. That's
an interesting use case.
That's called pulling things full circle.
And the Bulgarian language has been added to Google Text-to-Speech. So if you speak Bulgarian, you can now have Home Assistant talk your language.
That's kind of neat. Yeah. Also, HomeKit support. So we're expanding HomeKit support for fans. So, you can get Siri to start connecting to your fans, I guess. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I've undertaken a campaign recently to talk a lot to Federico Vitici, he's the editor-in-chief of Mac Stories, and they've been running a lot of pieces lately on smart homes, and they seem to know nothing about Home Assistant and all the HomeKit stuff that's been added to it over the last month. So I'm trying to push it in front of him. Hopefully it'll catch on as the de facto solution for HomeKit going forward.
That's interesting, actually. Yeah, it's really come quite a bit of a way from when they started. So every release, you're seeing more and more.
Yeah,
updates.
We've been talking about HomeKit. Yeah, for the past couple of months, it just seems to be going crazy. Like there's some great contributions.
Yeah,
which is awesome.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Another one for HomeKit now as well is there's support for codes. So if you have an alarm panel or a lock connected with HomeKit, and it requires a code for it to unlock or lock, you can now specify that in your YAML file, and Home Assistant can then turn off or on those alarm panels for you.
There's also some Rain Machine updates, also from Aaron. Man, you're doing quite a bit.
I know. I go on these moments where my wife is gracious enough to let me do some programming, and so I just try and hammer out a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I think you guys mentioned it last week. The intention here, Rain Machine was actually my first integration, and originally it was just a switch platform that could allow you to interact with programs and zones. And I've been refactoring it into more of a component model so that I'm going to add sensors to it, services to it, all sorts of other things that'll make it useful beyond just a bunch of switches.
So obviously you have Rain Machine. How many Rain Machine units do you have at your house?
I actually just have one, the HD12. But I really like it. It's a great device. It's actually interesting. I'll throw out the quick plug that the city of Denver is the home of Ratio. So maybe I'm a bad guy for not supporting my local business, but I do like Rain Machine just because of the local control. If the internet goes down, obviously our credence applies that you ought to still be able to control your smart home. So it's nice to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, as I'm, it's actually the timing couldn't be better, because for me personally, I'm actually looking at redoing my backyard, just actually landscaping it and such, and as part of that, I do want to put in proper irrigation and things like that if I get the chance. So yeah, this is fantastic, and I'm glad to hear that. I haven't done a lot of research in it, so I'm glad to hear that Rain Machine is working well for you, Aaron.
Absolutely, man.
All right, and in other changes that have come out since our last episode, Home Assistant have released a new developers microsite and Twitter account. So just to try and keep, the developers and the users sort of separate, there's now a new #has_devs Twitter account, so you can follow that if you want to contribute to Home Assistant and find out, all the latest updates that will affect developers. And there's also developers.homeassistant.io as well.
That's right. And also kind of noteworthy, Otto Winter has some interesting stuff going on that he posted on Twitter. And I mean, I don't really even know how to describe this, but there's essentially a lot of onboarding changes that they're looking at making. So how do we add different, for example, how do we add different microcontrollers and things like that to Home Assistant?
Yeah, it's basically like a UI for setting up your microcontroller. Instead of having to flash firmware, you can just go through and answer a step-by-step wizard of what you want it to do, and then Home Assistant will take over.
It's really cool, actually. It looks like, and Otto can correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like the underlying mechanism or library is another thing he's written. I believe it's called ESP. He has ESP Home Lib, which is a really nice C library for getting ESP 8266 and 32 microcontrollers running really quickly. And then he's got ESP Home YAML, which I know, we have different feelings about YAML, but the idea here is being able to configure one of these controllers without ever touching traditional programming language, which is just a fabulous concept.
Actually, I think Frank released a ESP YAML add-on for Hass.io maybe this week or last week.
Yeah.
So that's interesting as well. Yeah.
Very cool to see. It's it's definitely geared towards all the talk about Home Assistant being a power users tool. These guys are doing a lot of great work to make it more approachable without sacrificing the power.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and a huge thank you to Otto, Paulus, Frank, and yourself as well, Aaron, and the entire team for that kind of stuff. So it's definitely interesting. So if anybody's interested, we will post the Twitter link that Otto posted, showing what that kind of looks like. That can be found in the show notes.
Yeah. So Aaron, thank you very much for coming on today. So we obviously now need to interrogate you and find out how you're using Home Assistant. So how long have you been using Home Assistant for? Yeah,
it's actually it's interesting. My foray into Home Assistant, I actually haven't been a user all that long. Maybe a year and a half, 2 years. I've been a software developer my whole life, and my wife and I built our first home just a couple of years ago. And home automation for me was it's interesting. It wasn't anywhere on the radar. I think our builder put in a single Z-Wave lock for the front door, and that was about it. So time went on, and I decided, I want to be able to control my front door lock with my phone. And I played around with a lot of the other projects, OpenHab and Demotics and all that type of stuff. And I remember coming across Home Assistant and having been a Python developer thinking, oh, that's great. I'm glad somebody's using Python, but I never did anything with it. And then finally, I don't know what it really precipitated it, but I came back around and gave it another shot and decided to really put some time and energy into how I configured it and was using it at home. And, that year and a half to 2 year time period has been a really rapid ascension in terms of my use of the product and my involvement in its development. So I can happily say it's been a wonderful addition to my life the last couple of years.
Oh, awesome.
That's fantastic. How are you running Home Assistant? Is it on Raspberry Pi or Docker or Hass.io or what's going on?
Yeah, so I'm still running it on a Raspberry Pi 3. It's funny, I tend to be the proponent of the model, and I've knock on wood, never had an SD card burn out or anything like that. So it's served my needs. And when I started using it, it was sort of pre-Hass.io. It might even have been pre-Haspian, way back in the day. And so I started out kind of developing my own Docker-based infrastructure into which I managed it. And as Hass.io and things like that have progressed, I've kind of kept pace in my own sort of build out just to have the complete control over it. So I'm a pretty vanilla user running it in its own intended way through a Docker environment.
Oh, nice.
That's not bad. Yeah. Are you using any other external tools like Node-RED or AppD or anything like that?
Sure. Great question. So I'm looking real quick. I always have to remind myself. I have to look at my Docker Compose file and see all the things. So I will give a real quick plug to you, Phil. One of the great tools I'm using HA Dockermon.
Oh, awesome.
So that I can obviously control all my various servers across my Pis. I mentioned this on my GitHub site. All of my Pis to manage our home automation. I am a Harry Potter nerd, so they're all named after schoolhouses, Gryffindor and Hufflepuff and things like that.
That's awesome.
So on the main one, I'm running Home Assistant, HA Dockermon. I'm running things like glances for system monitoring, temperature and disk usage and all that. And Rohan, you asked about sort of automation layer. I am 100%
Cool.
app daemon. I love Node-RED. I love it so much, and I think it's wonderful. I'm just, having been a software developer for so long, I am ingrained in the, object-oriented programming methodology mindset. So it's hard for me to transition to something that's more visual than just writing code into a text editor. So everything that I do is app daemon.
So that's interesting. So I actually installed Node-RED this week, and I've found it a little bit strange to get my head around, the flows and, all that sort of stuff. But as a developer myself, with app daemon, so can you create like a full object-orientated sort of way to do your smart home?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question,
cool.
Phil. So if you take I try to get all this up to my GitHub site, so it's there as a reference. I'll put more documentation around it. But as a quick example, I have made a structure on top of app daemon where everything is broken out into either what I call an app or an automation. So an app might be something that has a standalone purpose. I have a security manager to manage locks and alarm systems. I have a notification manager that handles single and repeating notifications being sent to various targets. Those are the apps.
Yep.
And then the automation is sort of the action that occurs. So the idea might be that an automation utilizes apps to fulfill its purpose. So on top of that, all my automations are made up of features. And these features can be applied one at a time, or they can be applied in a repeated sense. Maybe one of the best examples, I have a switch automation, and that switch automation has several features under it, like being able to toggle the switch at a certain time or event. I might implement that feature several times to say, I want to toggle a switch on at sunset, and I want to toggle it off at 11 p.m. or something like that. So to answer your question, Phil, the time and other smarter people than I will tell whether I've over-engineered this thing. But I really like it because it just feels like it's composed of really nice insulated objects, all defined for a single purpose. And I'm sure I'll wake up a month from now and hate the whole thing and make version 2 of it. But I think I've shown that it can be done.
Yeah, well, it makes sense because the reason I installed Node-RED was I've recently got a whole bunch of smart globes because I'm renting, so I can't just do switches. And they're from Lightify, Osram Lightify. And I've noticed that if I turn the group on, there'll be like one downlight that doesn't turn on as part of that group. So my original thinking was, okay, cool, I will just create a Home Assistant script that will just, call itself until that light bulb turns on. But Home Assistant scripts can't have multiple instances running. As soon as you call script turn on for itself, it's already running, so it dies. So then I decided to do a recurring Node-RED flow, and which I then, in my own network, DDoSed Home Assistant, which the CPU would climb up to 100%, and Home Assistant would lose connection and start complaining everything was offline, and eventually fall over and crash. So
that's wonderful.
Pulling my hair out there. So now I have all these Node-RED flows, and as I'm just starting to use Node-RED, I'm finding it difficult to reuse, a lot of code. I think Node-RED, you're supposed to flow the information through, whereas I need to, go back in loops and do this to that light, do that to this light, and there's a lot of copying and pasting, which I think it's not manageable for me. And whereas I'd like, being a developer, a whole centralized, controller where it has the state, it has, all the functions, it does its thing, all in one place. There's one place of code I just have to update. So yeah, I totally get that whole appeal for app daemon now. So you may have converted me to look into that a bit more.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and it is challenging though. I feel like especially the Home Assistant Reddit community, I would swear 80% of the posts nowadays are about Node-RED. So clearly it's been. Yeah. So I am jealous of when somebody pops open a browser and arranges a node and hits publish, and suddenly it's live. And I think, well, that's cool. I'm going to go open my text editor and push it to GitHub. But maybe what I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts. Maybe what we've seen here is a nice progression from you start out with the YAML, the built-in automation interface in Home Assistant, and then, not to downplay Node-RED, but maybe Node-RED is the next logical chain in the evolution. And then really, if you are passionate about getting into the guts of more software development, maybe AppDaemon is the final road for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. And based on just what you've described with that whole MVC flow, I think you might be right, because you can do, if you've got like a proper own states and whole other services that you can call through AppDaemon that you may not be able to do with a Node-RED flow, then yeah, absolutely. I think for the ultimate power user of Home Assistant, I think AppDaemon might be the eventual progression where you have to go.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is Node-RED kind of brings in that, especially as you start having, like we just talked about the work that guys like Otto and Paulus and Frank are working on around making everything easier, right? So Node-RED might actually be a really interesting way to get automations done easy, right? And then obviously for more complex automations, then you would move to something like AppDaemon, and then requiring more complex knowledge and requiring the knowledge of Python, etc. Right?
Yeah, that's a great point, Rohan. I like that. I think I've really tried to juggle and figure out, can these live together? They absolutely can. I'm sure there's a way to do everything that is done in AppDaemon in Node-RED. I think the places where I've run into trouble, and I've tried to play with some of my heavier stuff in Node-RED a few times. I think the place where I've had trouble, and you touched on this, Phil, is when you have something that isn't really represented by a workflow. So for instance, I've got an AppDaemon app, one of my apps called the Notification Manager, and it has two functions on it. You say notification manager.send or notification manager.repeat. And to each of those functions, you pass, you can pass a title, a message, a date and a time when it should occur, a target that it should go to, all this stuff. And so as I'm flowing throughout all my automation layer, if I want to fire off a notification to everyone who's not home that repeats every 30 minutes, it's a piece of cake to just call that appropriate method on my AppDaemon app. Maybe Node-RED has that concept with subflows and stuff like that, but it seems like more challenging than what AppDaemon provides.
Well, again, you got to remember AppDaemon, because it is essentially an extension where you'd require programming skills such. For programmers, it is a lot more logical, right? And to be honest, I haven't played with Node-RED enough to know where its shortcomings are. But from what you're saying, it sounds like for doing that kind of complex things, it would be a lot easier to have AppD do that.
Sure, I would say all this is just a huge shout out back to Paulus and Pascal and the whole core team. The fact that all of these add-ons are so orthogonal to the Home Assistant experience. They can all talk to Home Assistant in near real time. I mean, it's just, that to me is stunning that we're even having this discussion with this type of platform.
The fact that you have choices.
Yeah, definitely. And we should also remember that there's the Home Assistant automation editor as well that is built in with Home Assistant. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays into the mix once that gets fleshed out a bit more too. So what sort of smart gear have you got in your house, Aaron? Have you got Hue or LifeX or Z-Wave, anything fancy?
Sure. So, I was thinking about this as I was putting together the list, and, I'm not running anything that I think is wildly outside the bounds of what other people are running. So I have a combination of, for switches and lights, I've got a combination of, I have some Belkin Wemo switches. I've got some Z-Wave switches. I have, several old salt lamps that have Sonoffs spliced into their power cord. So I'm all over the place when it comes to lights. Looking through my gear list here, the usuals, in terms of, I use Sonos for our media playback throughout the house. I have Ubiquiti networking gear. One of the ones that I just picked up that I really am enjoying. So I was thinking about this and talking about it with my wife last night. It's interesting that for the most part, we interact with Home Assistant, not through the UI, although I take a lot of time, an inordinate amount of time to organize my UI. But it's mostly interacted with through either our trusty lady AI friend whose name I will not mention,
the Amazon Echo.
yes, and really through the automations themselves. So in terms of the voice capabilities, one of the great products that I just came across online is by Anchor. Everybody knows Anchor, I think, these days. They make a Echo-enabled 2-port USB car charger.
Yes,
No way.
What's been great about that is, the whole being able to announce, hey, I'm home, as I drive up and have the garage open and the doors unlock and the security system off. I never thought it would be that big of a deal, but since she is now with me in my car, I find it's a bigger deal than I anticipated.
That's so cool. So I actually bought from Amazon a car mount for the Echo Dot, and I put the Echo Dot in the car. It didn't last very long, but just because I don't have a Wi-Fi connection in the car unless I would have to fumble, get my phone out, turn the data sharing on, and then the Echo would have to try and connect to the Wi-Fi. And
Sure.
yeah, it was. But how do you find having Alexa in the car? Sorry, I said her name, but how do you find having her in the car? Did she? Because I think one of the advertising points was turn-by-turn directions.
Yeah, absolutely. I happen to use Waze for mine, and just today on my way to talk with you guys, I said, "Hey, lady, give me directions to home," and she did her usual okay, and she popped open the Waze app and immediately routed me to home. So, obviously, of course, I could have done that with my hands before I started driving, but just the fact that I didn't, it's a simple thing, and I never thought I would care so much about it, but I am caring more about it.
So how does it connect? Does it connect to Bluetooth through your phone, or does it use like a Wi-Fi in the car?
It uses Bluetooth, and it is smart enough to ask you up front, hey, how do you normally listen to music in the car? Do you do it through Bluetooth? Do you, like I have an older car, do you do it through an auxiliary cable? And it will route audio through your phone on the correct interface, but it's doing the communication over Bluetooth.
What kind of phone do you have?
Just an iPhone, Rohan, just a standard run-of-the-mill iPhone. So I guess it's not a downside. The only sort of thing to know is you have to have the ROAV Viva app running in the background, which is not the end of the world. But I've had it for all of 2 weeks here, and it was one of those things where I saw a deal. It was normally $40 down to 30, and after purchasing it, I thought, oh man, Aaron, did you just buy something that you're not going to use? I'm sure we've all been down that road. But it was, I will tell you guys, it's been a good purchase. If such a thing as it piques your interest, I would recommend it. Obviously, our Google Home friends may have other mechanisms to do that, but if you're a Echo person, it's great stuff.
It's funny. So I'm getting really excited about this because you're the first person I've talked to that actually has one. So I saw it when they announced it, saying, "Hey, it's going to be coming out, blah blah blah." And I was looking into it, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" And I don't think it's available in Canada just yet. I'm hoping it. I haven't looked in a while, but I'm definitely going to check tonight. But yeah, this is something I've wanted for quite a bit. So that it's fantastic that you actually use yours rather than it just being a novelty.
I can highly recommend it. You can feel free to call me if you don't like your purchase, but I think it's pretty safe bet.
Wow. Well, if not available in Canada, they won't be available in Australia, but I will look at importing one because the fact that it's Bluetooth and not Wi-Fi, I think that is a very big, and it's got 2 USB chargers, so it's perfect. But yeah, that's a really big selling point. I like that.
As a quick addendum, we were trying to decide last night, what do you call the thing that you plug this into? And I was thinking, we used to say you plug it into the cigarette lighter in your car, but nobody has that anymore. So I don't know what that's called.
Yeah, I guess just a 12 volt port. Yeah. So are you using anything for presence detection in the house to say you're home or away or something like that automatically outside of the Anchor not cigarette lighter?
Yes, absolutely. So we actually early on, I had been starting to play around with MQTT a little bit before getting into Home Assistant, and as I was looking into it, I thought, what, as an experiment, and really my whole home automation obsession now has been a playground for me to experiment with things. We installed our own MQTT broker on Hufflepuff, and we both use OwnTracks. And actually, I know a lot of people have had struggles with the reliability of OwnTracks. We use it faithfully on our iPhones, and I would say it works really well. I did augment it. One of the Docker services running on Hufflepuff is an iBeacon Docker container. I have found that when you connect own tracks to an iBeacon, as it's described in the Home Assistant docs, it does tend to recognize a little quicker when you arrive and when you leave. But that's been working really well. And Phil, another shout out to you. I use an app daemon variant of it, but we are faithful users of your not so binary presence detection.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really glad that a lot of people have found great uses for it. So I'm glad another person's using it as well.
Absolutely. The one other, Rohan, you asked earlier, other gear I'm using, I'll mention. Obviously, a lot of the integrations that I build are things that I have personal need for. It's usually how I recommend people get involved in Home Assistant, is to find something that hasn't been supported or adequately supported yet that you have an interest in, and get to it. So the Rain Machine was my first. The other one, we have several of these now. The YIE home camera. That platform, I will just pitch it real quick. It's a beautiful camera, great picture. It has a lot of great ancillary features, like it can detect if a baby's crying, so you can use it as like a baby monitor. We got several of those now for sort of in-house cameras. I try not to freak out my guests with cameras all over the place, but those are ones we have as well. So I would say, the stuff I've picked up, I now sort of feel incumbent upon myself to add it to Home Assistant if it hasn't been added already.
Yeah, that's great. And so do those cameras, are they one of those ones that report back to China?
They do. One of the sort of, I guess, routes that I've gone down, the instructions that I wrote in the docs talk about needing to install a customized firmware. I'm sure, I haven't done the network tracking that I probably should. I'm sure there's still out of band communication that's still occurring. But I've really tried to, using that custom firmware, I've tried to lock down exactly what is sending out. I've also moved, this is something, I know it's a more technical topic, but I highly recommend anyone who can do it, put all of your smart devices on like a separate VLAN or subnet of your network, so that you can shut it off from the internet if it's wigging you out. But you bring up a great point, Phil, that I do have a tendency to buy a lot of, as I'm sure we all do, buy a lot of gear that may or may not be reporting its internals back to somebody else.
Well, this is something that we've been preaching, a while, make sure everything's blocked off the internet, but of course we don't do it. And actually, Rohan and I were talking the other day on Slack, and Rohan sent me a tweet from one of the, was it YIE lights, I think it was?
Yeah.
Rohan? The lights that, because of the GDPR stuff that's come out, they've put a message saying, sorry, you can't use this app, or you can't use this light bulb until you accept the new privacy policy, or something like that. And
interesting.
And then because our app doesn't comply with GDPR, and that made me sort of think, well, hang on a second. If a light bulb can't be used anymore because of new privacy laws, then what data don't they want to publicly tell us that they're sending?
I'm still not sure how true or false that specific post is, but it is that don't believe everything you find on the internet. But it's on one of those. Not like one of those like joke Twitter accounts, right? That I follow. It's called Internet of, and then derogatory term for people.
Yeah, actually, if you want to look at some funny GDPR stuff, there's gdprfail.com as well, which also had that post as well. So yeah, some pretty funny stuff on there. So how many people are in your smart home, Aaron? Is it just you and your wife? Have you got kids that you've automated yet, or?
No, just the two of us, Phil. We, it is interesting though. We are thinking about what will this world look like when children are introduced to it. Obviously, we have some qualms with slapping an iPhone on a 5-year-old. So it's actually, one of the reasons, another one of the integrations that I've built is the Tile device tracker. Obviously, and I think you guys covered this on a previous episode, one of the challenges there is that my integration isn't using any sort of localized Bluetooth. It's all using the same back of house API that the Tile app is communicating with over the cloud. So it's not great for, immediacy of presence detection, but I started thinking about, okay, well, I don't feel good about giving a kid an iPhone right away, but would I feel okay about putting a Tile on their backpack or something like that?
Yeah.
The other thing we've talked about too is that, gosh, and this is an area where I want to talk with Andrew, who's the creator of AppDemon, if there's a good way to do this. But all the things that we've been doing over voice control, I'm starting to think about, oh my goodness, what happens when you have a talkative, little 5-year-old running around yelling things at the Echo, opening, closing things and locking doors. And so I got to figure that out. It's to your point, Phil, earlier, if we preach separate control and then we don't do it. I think I preach, getting ready for more people in your smart home than you currently have, but I don't know if I'm doing enough to really get prepared for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, some interesting features like voice recognition, i.e., is it you? Is it, is it me? Is it somebody else talking? Who's talking? And then based on that, do certain actions, right? So if you can cleverly get everybody to, say, hey, this is, whatever. And then from that point, if your voice assistant can recognize who's who, and then, basically ignore commands from a 3-year-old,
sure.
You're not valid anymore.
Yes. Yeah. If anybody asks to turn on like some hardcore hip hop, she'll have to say, oh, sure, just give me your password or something. Exactly. I don't know. I got to figure that out.
Yeah. Well, the Amazon Echo has, like voice recognition, like it can tell people apart, but you still if one person asks for a song, it doesn't go to their playlist. It still stays on the account. Whereas, right. You'd think surely, it's been a feature for a year. Come on, just give me complete, access. Like if I talk to you, use my account. Someone else talks to you, use their account.
Yeah, that's it. If anybody from Amazon's listening, please, number one, thank you for changing our lives. Number two, please listen to our podcast.
Yeah, and custom wake words. Come on. So what are some of your favorite automations you've got? If you're proud about your smart home and the automation you've done, what's the best one you could think of?
Sure. Yeah. I would say, not in terms of complexity necessarily. One of my favorite automations has to do with our vacuum. We have the Xiaomi Mi smart vacuum. And so we have it set to run on a schedule. I think we do it every Monday and Thursday. And so just the chain of events I'm pretty proud of because it accomplishes a very complicated structure. So we also have a Simply Safe security system that has motion sensors, and obviously that can potentially catch movement from a little robot vacuum. So what it does is when it starts to run, it basically sends a signal, an event to our security manager saying, hey, I'd like to run. Could you go ahead and if anybody's home, you don't have to do anything, but if the alarm is set in away mode, could you set it to home mode? To still still protect the door locks, and then let me know when you're done. And so security manager does its thing, then it broadcasts an event back saying, okay, I'm done. And that tells the vacuum to run its cycle. And then it does its thing, yada, yada. And when it's done, when it returns back to the dock, it does a similar exchange where it tells the security manager, if anybody's home, don't worry about it. But if nobody's home, go ahead and rearm the security system back into away mode. And then the last thing it does is I have another app, an AppDemon app called the Briefing Manager, and it registers with the Briefing Manager saying, hey, the vacuum has been run, it needs to be emptied. And so using Phil's wonderful not so binary presence detection, when somebody has transitioned from just arrived to home, we can kind of choose either we'll get a notification on our phone, hey, you need to empty the vacuum,
nice.
Or it'll, we have the Sonos to do text to speech, hey, you need to empty the vacuum. And lastly, the push notification variant allows you to really quickly pull down on the notification, say you've emptied it, and that will sort of reset the state of everything. So again, nothing overly crazy from my vantage point, but I like how many pieces of the system it's touching.
Yeah, that's really cool. And just how did you discover that you needed to put the house into away mode before the vacuum cleaner could start. Did you have an accidental alarm trigger?
We did, absolutely. It happened on a day. My wife owns her own business, and so she was out and about. I was driving to work, and I got a phone call from our alarm company, which is Simply Safe, their dispatcher. And they said, this is to let you know your alarm's going off. And obviously, while you're driving, I'm not going to look at cameras and stuff like that. So I kept thinking, oh no, like, did we really have an event? And so I just took a leap of faith and said, oh, that's probably just our smart vacuum. Go ahead and ignore that. And fortunately, I checked later on through our cameras and did find that was the case. So did learn that, a small little robot animal like that can be picked up by motion sensors.
It's funny because I had that awesome. exact thing happen to me the other day. For whatever reason, I got nominated to interview some people at where I work. And so I'm running out first thing in the morning to make it on time for interviews. And next thing you know, I turn on the Roomba, leave the house, and next thing you know, 10 minutes after I leave, I see a notification come in on my phone going, "Hey, motion detected." And I was like, What are you talking about? What? And I was like, oh man. And so I start freaking out, and then I turn around, and this is on a toll highway too, naturally. So I turn around and come back, and I'm like, freak out. I come in, and I check every room, I check the basement, check the closets, check everything. And the only thing that's moving around is the Roomba. And I was like, are you kidding me?
You were going to do some damage to the intruder there.
I was so angry.
I know that everybody's pitching the robot vacuums, but nobody stopped to question, like, well, what happens when they set off our security?
It's almost like you need to have some kind of cross reference, right? With like, security camera inside the house detecting if it's a person or not a person. And based on that, hey, this robot vacuum's moving. Okay, fine. You're cool.
Yeah, I know that might be a great use case for any enterprising developers out there to incorporate the new Facebox API.
There you go.
One of the other automations I'll tell you guys about. I haven't seen it very much, and it's simple, but it's pretty useful. I've got a tab in Home Assistant that is for systems, and that's where I monitor battery levels and all the temperatures and disk space of my Raspberry Pis, and I also oversee the versions of various softwares that I'm running. So I've got the version of AppDaemon that I've installed and the version that's available out on the internet. I've got HA Dockermon in there. I've got Home Assistant. I've got Tasmota for my Sonoff. So what I like about this is there's a lot of times where not Home Assistant, because I, like you, like everybody, I'm always looking for the next version. But some of these other softwares, especially things like the firmwares that I put in the Yi camera, or Phil, if you push a new HA Dockermon, I don't think I would know about that, just by daily glancing around. So just another simple automation in there that checks if the version of what I have is less than the version that is now appearing in the state of that available sensor. Just send me a quick notification or put a quick item in my to-do list saying, hey, when you get a chance, update to the latest Home Assistant or HE Dockermon. So simple one, but I really like it just because it helps me automate my life a little more.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah, I think that the sort of same thing comes down to for anyone that uses, Sonar or Radar to automate, having to download episodes of TV shows. Like, it's one less thing you have to worry about doing. Like it just happens in the background, and it allows you to keep your focus on something else.
Absolutely. That's a great point. That's it.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Aaron. We appreciate you coming on, and we also appreciate you contributing back to the community with all your various add-ons and components that you've added in. We'll leave links to your Twitter and your GitHub repo, which you've just recently pushed up as well. So thank you for sharing your Home Assistant config with everyone. And we hope we can have you back on soon.
Yeah, thank you, guys. It's an absolute pleasure. I say on behalf of the whole community, thank you for all you guys do. We really enjoy it.
Hey, happy to. This is fantastic. We love doing this kind of stuff. We love having people like you on the show, Aaron. So, thanks for making the time as well. So
great. Thank you, guys.
Cheers, guys.